In this video, we're going to continue implementing our list abstract data type class. In the last video, we talked about the proposed data fields and methods that we will put into our class. And so I pasted those in here just so that we could remember them. We said that we're going to store 3 data values, an array, a maximum number of items, and an actual number of items. Those will be our data fields in our list class. And then we're going to write 7 different methods, a constructor, something that lets us find the length of the list, something that lets us add an item to the list, something that retrieves a value in a particular index, something that searches the list, and then the equals method and the toString method. You should always implement those for classes that you're writing, so we'll implement those as well. So we're going to start with the data fields. Remember, the data fields are the essential information that's part of the class. And sometimes we call those instance variables. That means exactly the same thing as data fields. Sometimes you'll call them data members. Those all mean the same thing. Data field, instance variable, data member, all synonyms. And I don't know why computer science has to have like 8 words that mean the same thing. I think it's just to confuse us. And so we're going to start writing our list class. I'm going to do it in IntelliJ so you can follow along. And remember that when you're creating a class, the instance variables or data fields, they're all declared outside of any method implementation. These variables are all globally accessible to any of the methods that we include inside the class. So we're going to make a data field for the array, one for the actual size and one for the max size. Let me pull up IntelliJ so we can start adding. Whoops, I thought I already had a new project open. So I'm going to make a new project. I'm going to make it from a template. And I'm going to call it list type. Yeah, that'll be good. I think I already have something that's called list type. I'll just make a list type 2 directory. All right, super. So when Java opens up in IntelliJ, it's going to give us our main method, but that's not where we want to put our attention. Right now, we're trying to create this container class that'll store the list of items. So I'm going to make a new Java file. And I'm going to call it list type. Remember, you don't have to include the word type in there. I just do that a lot of times to help me remember this is a data type, not like a built-in thing in the API or not a variable name. So that's just to keep me organized. And when you create your list type file, it'll be in the same directory as your main. So again, we're trying to declare the data fields that are part of this class. We said there's going to be 3 of them. We want to create the array. And we want this array to be very flexible for it to be able to store any kind of reference data type. So we want it to be able to store strings, but we also would like to be able to store movies or students or any other reference data type that we might have in our project. And so instead of using a specific data type like string that would be very limiting and only allow us to use strings in our list, we're going to use the object type because remember, that's the superclass of all superclasses. Any class that we create can be filled in anywhere that we're expecting an object data type. So we're going to call it object, and let me check what I called it. I called it array. I'm going to put an object with my square brackets to say it's an array and then call it array. Again, that's going to be my list of items. And any reference data type is going to be able to be stored in there. And then I want to store the actual number of items. So I'll call actual size, number of items currently in the list. And then I also want to be able to create a max size. That's the maximum number of items that can be stored. Super. So those are my 3 data fields. I'm going to mark this as the end of my list type class. And all of those are at the top of the program before any of the methods begin. So now we want to turn our attention to the methods. The methods are the operations that we'll be able to perform on this list of data. And we know that one of the things we want to be able to do is create a new empty list. And we know constructors are the ideal method that allow us to instantiate an object, to initialize the data fields to a safe known state. And we know that we can have more than one constructor. We can have a default constructor, we can have a non-default constructor that requires some parameters, and we can have multiple non-default constructors if we have different kinds of scenarios that we might use to initialize a object in our class. So we're going to create just two constructors, a default constructor. We're going to use that to create a list with just a maximum of 10 items. So we're going to assume if you just create a new empty list and you don't say any different, you want to get 10 items. On the other hand, we'll allow flexibility if somebody's creating a list and want to have a different maximum size. We'll allow them to use the non-default constructor that creates a list with a specific maximum size. So let's write those methods in our project. We want to make this new constructor. And we know that our constructor has to have a name that matches the name of the class. So it has to be called list type, same capitalization. And if we're making a default constructor, can't have any parameters. And then inside the constructor, we need to initialize the data fields that are part of this class. So let's leave the array for a minute and focus on the actual size and the maximum size. We said in the default constructor, we want the maximum size to be 10 items. So I'm going to set that up in here. Max size, we want to make that equal to 10. And think about initially when you're creating a brand new empty list, how many actual items are in there? If you thought 0, you are absolutely correct. We're going to set the actual size equal to 0 to represent the fact that there's currently no items that are part of this list. And then the last thing we need to do is instantiate this array. We've declared the array, but we haven't set up the space for it. We didn't say object square brackets array equals new object and then given it a maximum size. And that's because we didn't know what the maximum size was up here where we declared it. We only know what the maximum size is once we get inside the constructor. So down here inside this constructor, I'm going to instantiate the array by saying array equals new object max size. Oops. Super. And now at this point, I've initialized each of the various data fields that are part of the list type class. I gave each of them an initial value. So that's the end of the constructor. Remember, that's the only point, the only thing that we do inside a constructor is initialize those data fields. So we also want to make a second constructor, a non-default constructor that allows the user to specify a maximum size. So let's write that as well. So it's also going to need to be a public method. It also has to be called list type because that's the name of the class. And now we want it to have a parameter that represents the user's selection of the maximum size. So we want to use the maximum size to initialize our data field max size. We're going to say max size equals max. That's assigning the value that's the parameter, placing that into our data field for max size. Just like before, if we're making a brand new empty list, it doesn't have any items in it, so the actual size is going to be 0. And then we need to instantiate the array to allocate space for it. We want to say array equals new object max size. And because we've assigned the max size our value max, it'll have the right information in it when we get to this point in our code. So those were our two constructors. Let me go ahead and make a Java.comment comment for each of them because that's important. We're making a list type constructor, and this is the default constructor. It means it doesn't have any parameters. And it doesn't have any return type. So I'm just going to say initializes the list to store 10 items max. And then down for my non-default constructor, the list type non-default. Just means it requires parameters. It initializes the list to store a user selected number of items. And max is the user selected number of. Super. Let me scroll down and make sure I didn't leave anything out. Got our data fields declared, and we created our constructors. So I think we're all good, ready to go on to our next method.